Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Young Fathers called Cocoa Sugar. You know, I'm genuinely surprised it's taken me this long to talk about Young Fathers at all. It's not like I wasn't aware that the group existed, but they always seemed a little bit adjacent to the music that's normally on my radar and covered on this show. So this review is going to be something of a learning experience for me. So, okay, Young Fathers, a trio from Scotland that started off on the indie label Anticon with a particularly off-kilter brand of hip-hop to which I couldn't really trace a clear sonic lineage. The melodies, they were cavernous and droning, the beats were blocky but still carried an impressive amount of groove, and the two MCs presented a brand of unsettled melancholy that used blunt but heavy language to convey increasingly bleak ideas, along with harmonies that were surprisingly stirring. I'm not really certain it was my thing. I do think the songwriting took a dip for the full-length debut Dead off their mixtapes, along with a weird synth rock pivot with a smattering of alternative R&B, but it was kind of compelling in a curious way. Not quite with the level of propulsive power I'd seen in a group like Algiers or Injury Reserve or Death Grips, but I got the appeal. But then they shifted again towards a lo-fi, indie, pop, rockish sound a year later for the record with the loaded title, White Men Are Black Men Too, and honestly, while I think it's a solid enough album, I think I might like it more for some of the ideas the trio was trying to explore conceptually rather than the sound itself, as the pop or rock-leaning elements could feel a tad hit or miss against their production style. But hey, who knows what direction they could be taking with this project, now on the Ninja Tune label proper. So alright, what do we get on Cocoa Sugar? So here's the thing. I feel like my mantra when it comes to all Young Fathers records thus far, it gets all the more clear with every single listen I gave Cocoa Sugar. And believe me, I gave this a lot of listens. And it's not that this project is bad. I won't deny that it's one of their most diverse, colorful, and overflowing with potent ideas. And for the audience who can clearly get into this material, it'll definitely win them over. I get why this is getting so much critical acclaim for this project in particular, and yet after well over a dozen listens, I said I gave this a lot of time, I'm just forced to admit that while I appreciate what this trio is doing, Young Fathers just doesn't resonate more deeply for me, especially on Cocoa Sugar, a project I admire a fair bit more than I actually like or enjoy. And you know, if it was one distinctive thing that kept me away from fully embracing Young Fathers, that'd be one thing. But the more listens I gave this project, the more I'd argue it's the little things that are all over the place. So let's start off with the songwriting. Now, discerning a theme on any project by this trio can be kind of tough to parse, but on the most abstract level, it comes from the lingering gap between physical satisfaction and spiritual fulfillment, however that can be found, typically between lust and love. And this can take very different forms, and it does on this album, from the obliquely referenced giant on Fee Fi that could span society to a god that the group clearly doesn't believe in, to the white artists in their space of indie music on turn, that Young Fathers doesn't really deride for their talent or hard work, but it's clear that they themselves don't want to be boxed in or isolated. And when confronted by systems that would do this to them, they seem keenly aware of the fragility of those systems on tracks like Lord or Holy Ghost, mostly through a sardonic recontextualization of religious iconography to lend their material some real power while sneering at the barriers that the systems try to erect. Not the first time this record reminded me a little of Algiers, and that's a good thing. But where this record truly gets intriguing is in that give and take found in a deeper love, like on songs like In My View and Tremolo and Wow, highlighting the search for an equal that can echo themselves, but also aware that with an elevated view of one's personal self, they tend to aim a little bit higher to satiate that ego. It's also a reason why Border Girls stood out so much to me, flirting with androgyny and blurred gender norms in a way that felt both natural and progressive and earnest in a great way. I got no problems, one of the better songs here. But ultimately, it doesn't seem like Young Fathers find much of an answer for their quest here, and by the closing track Picking You, the sentiment is less of transcendence, of which again they don't believe, and more again that it's the closest thing to heaven, maybe. Still self-serving in an odd sort of way, sure, and definitely not reflective of a sustainable love, but given this album's oddly static progression, it's really the only conclusion that fits thematically. I'm not surprised that they ended up here. Now granted, I could be missing all of the mark with this. Young Fathers have always structured their half-sung, half-murmured, half-rapped lyrics in a way that intentionally feels oblique and open to interpretation. And by infusing a load of biblical iconography, at least half-ironically, and a lot of loaded symbolism around that, they definitely are not making it easier, but that actually does tie into the one big issue I have with this album. progression. I'm all in favor of circular themes, so the record eventually arrives back at the start having picked up some wisdom along the way, but the trio here is coming in with the same sense of balanced and nuanced framing that has characterized much of all their previous work, and they sound as frustrated as I feel by the end of the record that they don't get to more of a conclusion, even if they are very much accepting of ambiguity in themselves. Hell, that's what lets them justify the deeply held humility of Lord and In My View against the darker touches or particularly meaner, nastier edge of Wire or Wow or especially Toy. But it's hard not to feel like this record is stuck in a lane a half step away from really cutting loose across the board, taking those vocals sung or spat into more strident swells, taking the pulsating gallops of groove from thrumming low-end dub, touches of gospel, and melodies that are just looking for the right excuse to burst forth to really explode here. Now don't get me wrong, there are crescendos on this project against the cavernous mix and ragged lo-fi pickups, adding layers of In My View and Turn and Wow to really burst forth, and yet it doesn't really happen. And the increasingly short song lengths often leave me feeling that we've got really damn potent fragments that could be refined with a little bit more structure, all the more emphasized by how Young Fathers intentionally brought in more conventional foundations to a lot of these songs in comparison with earlier albums. Now granted, that structure often pays some considerable dividends. The more soulful hook of In My View is great, the minor key popping swell of Tremolo, the larger choral vocals playing against the clipped wiry synth line of Border Girl that I really liked, the really damn potent shuddering groove of Holy Ghost, but then you have the tonal choice in the vocals or synth, they don't always work for me. From the nasal touches on the beginning of Holy Ghost to the grimy, shrill vocal filters on Turn or Wire that almost sound mechanical, elements that just get distracting from songs that were good but really could have been great. But again, for as much as this record didn't quite come together for me, I'm almost certain Cocoa Sugar will satisfy any listener who's on board for this lo-fi dub soul fusion that Young Fathers are working here, scattering in traces of hip-hop, synth-pop, and gospel along the way. And again, there are a lot of potent, well-framed ideas and pathos that runs through this record. There's an earnest power that I can definitely respect, but it never really quite gets all the way there to resonate for me, and when you couple it with production and synth choices that split the difference between earthy or ramshackle potency and jittery, shrill blockiness, I'm left wishing that I could like this a fair bit more. For me, it's a very strong 6 out of 10, definitely recommended, just not quite for me, and I can accept that. And hell, like with any Young Fathers record, you're not going to hear anything quite like it this year, so yeah, if you're curious, definitely worth a look. Check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. This record was a bit of a weird sit, but hey, if you're curious about it, it's worth a try. If you want to buy the record, links in the description below, and I got the poll up there. I know this band's been getting a ton of critical acclaim, so there's your opportunity to tell me how wrong I am. But again, I really wanted to get into this album too. There's a lot of really interesting ideas and potent thought going through it. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process or help support this channel, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there, but till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.